the survival of the fittest. A better metaphor is the survival of the barely tolerable. If you're good enough to survive, then you're in, and if you're not good enough to survive, then you're out.
Okay, mutations do not produce any kind of evolution, Pierre Gross says, who's a strong believer in evolution. Mutations are a rescrambling of gene code. It doesn't give you any new information. Polyploidy, as you should know, if anybody being a plant botanist, that just simply doubles existing information. It doesn't give you new information. It's a copy of the original code. This bull, for instance, has five legs. No new information has been added. He has a copy of a leg put in the wrong place. That's not new information. Here's a short-legged sheep. No new information added. This is a mutation. Two-headed turtle. There's no new information. It's a doubling of information. That is not evolution, and it's not ninja. It's just a mutant turtle. It's scrambling. This biology textbook shows the kids a mutant fly. It says normal flies have 2 wings. This mutant has 4. This rare mutation, like most mutations, is harmful. Beneficial mutations are the raw material for natural selection. Well, excuse me, but why didn't they show us a beneficial mutation? Nobody's ever proven one. And if you did have a beneficial mutation, who would it marry? And who would the grandkids marry and the great-grandkids? You got a real serious problem here. Nobody's ever proven a beneficial mutation, and scrambling information that already exists is not creating new information and doubling the copying the code. I'm embarrassed that you would say polyploidal is an example of new information. You, of anybody, should know it is not new information.
Dr. Hovind, you acknowledge that variations exist in creationist view of the origin of life, i.e. zebras, horses. All life began 6,000 years ago. Where is the evidence of the birth of these variations? Surely someone would have witnessed the birth of a zebra from a horse or the Great Dane from a Chihuahua.
The question is a little convoluted and confusing. Start again.
Okay. You acknowledge that variations exist in creationist view of the origin of life, i.e. zebras and horses. All life began 6,000 years ago. Where is the evidence of the birth of those variations? Surely someone would have witnessed them.
I don't think there's any question that variations happen. The question is, how far can it go? As far as the horse and the zebra having a common ancestor, I don't know when it happened, or even if it happened. I suspect that it could have happened, and that would be a legitimate field of research for scientists. But then to conclude that horses and bananas are related is way beyond the observable evidence. And I showed you from the textbooks, they do teach the kids we all came from a rock. That's what it boils down to. I know you don't like me saying that. Well, you ought to get rid of that dumb theory, and I wouldn't have to say it. Variations happen, but they have limits. Okay, farmers breed for bigger pigs, but they're never going to get a pig as big as Texas. Roaches become resistant to pesticides, but they will never become resistant to a sledgehammer. Okay. Yes, variations happen, but they're limited, and they always produce the same kind of plant or animal. That's not evolution. And the information for the variation is already present in the gene code. Nothing new is ever added. The gene pool of the new variety is now more limited. Somebody spent years developing a Chihuahua. All that work to make a 100% useless dog. Genetic information is lost when you get a variant. Ask any farmer that raises anything. The further you get away from the norm with your hybrid, the more problems you start to have. Either disease resistance goes down, or like the Great Danes, or many dogs have hip dysplasia, you get problems. You might get one desirable trait, like a cow that gives more milk, but you always get some other problem someplace else. And if you turned all the dogs in the world loose back into the woods, 90% of the varieties we have today wouldn't survive. Up in Alaska, probably the long-haired ones would survive, and in the desert, the short-haired dingoes would survive. But you're always going to have a dog. That's not new information.
You did say that 10,000 species gave origin to millions of species in the last 4,000 years. So that question was right. Somebody must have observed that happening one of those times at least. It is also very interesting that you keep saying that nobody has ever observed the origin of a new species. That is absolutely not true. There are some examples in the biological literature of direct observations of the origin of new species, both in animals and in plants. Since you've cited your tapes and books several times tonight, let me quote mine once in a while. There is a table there with references that you can check out of the species, some examples of the species that actually have been observed within historical time, within the last 100 years or so. So speciation, origin of new species, does occur. It's a myth that it does not. I think that's about it for
Okay.
that question.
Next question. There's been no mention as to why an eyeball would evolve in the first place. In the absence of a creator or designer, an organism would have to realize that there was a capacity for sight without prior knowledge of it or evidence for it. How can an organism therefore develop sight?
No, that doesn't work that way. The eye originated as a single, very simple pigment that is sensitive to light. You might not think of that as an eye, but if it makes the difference, if you're a microorganism, you're a unicellular organism, you have this little pigment, which is a very simple molecule, by the way, it doesn't require much complexity, and that pigment tells you, look, there is light over there and there is darkness over there, and guess what? Food is actually usually related to light, then you better swim that way. Well, that little pigment is going to make the difference for you between life and death. So eyes don't evolve overnight. They don't evolve because organisms know that they need eyes. As I said before, it is a co-evolutionary process between the organism and the environment. So you start with tiny little steps, tiny little things which are very simple, and then you become more and more complicated because, in fact, guess what? Once that I can tell if there is light over there and darkness over here, it might be advantageous if a mutation in that pigment or in the structure in which that pigment is actually housed will tell me not only that there is light versus non-light, but it tells me that there is more light in one direction and less light in the other direction, meaning that it's capable of detecting a gradient. From there on, if you can form very simple images, very, very blurred ones, it's very advantageous because any image is better than nothing, and so on and so forth. You keep going that way. By the way, this process has been simulated under computer conditions, and it turns out that the intermediate steps that have been predicted by evolutionary biologists are exactly what a computer simulation will give you if you don't give the program any prior knowledge of where you want to go end up at the end. That's pretty interesting indirect evidence that the eye evolved that way. The other evidence, which is more direct, you can actually look at many of the intermediate steps because many of the organisms living today still have the intermediate steps. You can find a bunch of gradations of complexity in the eye. It's not that every organism on Earth has a complex eye.
Okay, you misquoted me twice last time. I never said there were 10,000 species on the ark. Get it right this time. I said there are 10,000 kinds. Kinds. Very, very important distinction, okay? And I never said nobody has ever observed a new species. I never said that. Nobody's ever observed a new kind. You got it? Good. Okay. Now, let's go to the eyeball here. Charles Darwin said, to suppose that the eye could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd. This textbook says the complex structure of the human eye may be the product of millions of years of evolution. This one says, I'll blow it up for you a little bit here, you can better understand how the eye might have evolved if you picture a series of changes during the evolution of the eye. This is exactly what he said a moment ago. You have to picture it. You have to imagine it. It doesn't take place in reality. You have to imagine how it happened. Imagine an animal with a spot that is sensitive to light. That gives him an advantageous, an advantage over those that don't have this spot, and therefore he's going to survive and the rest are going to be killed. See, evolution is based on death. One animal evolves a little better than the rest have to die in order for that one with the spot to take over the population. Evolution is based on the idea that death is wonderful, death is good, death's how we get ahead, the bad ones have to die.
Thank you.
That's exactly the opposite of creation. The Bible says God formed the eye. That's the way it happened.
Next question's for you. Dr. Hovind's argument would be nullified if it could be conclusively proven that God does not exist. Please address the existence of God from a purely scientific perspective.
Address the existence of God from a scientific perspective. Here we have an example of somebody